As of the published date of this episode, I am an associate of Ulta Beauty. The ideas and thoughts represented here are my own and not that of my employer. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Scaling Emerging Beauty. I'm so excited to talk to you all and introduce you to this week's guest. We have Kellie Chen, who is the founder of 8 Rue, a boutique marketing and branding agency. And we're going to talk about all of the things that are going to help emerging brands. Here's a snippet from our conversation.
So why do you go to a trained professional or a professional agency? Because we're trained to look at brand in that way, and we're able to dissect it in so much different way, so that when we have that foundation set up for you, now your brand, all of a sudden, the logo, the colors, they mean something. There is ways that you are able to grow it with a lot of meanings behind it.
Let me tell you a little bit more about Kellie. Kellie has a variety of experiences working both at in-house agencies, working directly with brands like SK2, Johnny Walker, and Ole Henriksen. This experience means that Kellie has had the opportunity to work with a variety of retailers, from the mass retailers like Target, Walmart, and CVS, and with boutique retailers like Sephora at Ole Henriksen. We take a deep dive into the importance of brand identity, how it's more than just colors, but how you can really go deep here. And we also talk about the importance of social media. I can't have an episode talking about marketing without talking about social media, right? I'm really excited for y'all to hear what we're going to cover today. Let's get into the episode. Kellie, I'm so happy to have you on the show because you have such rich experience. And I especially love when folks who have had experience at big brands like Ole Henriksen, like SK2, especially when these brands were reformulating or relaunching, because sometimes we forget that even these big brands, I think back, even CeraVe, I worked for a company myself that helped CeraVe during their relaunch. These brands have been around for years and years, and they too have to sometimes redefine themselves,
yes.
Figure out who are we, what's changed, what are we going to do? So I'm thinking with your experience in beauty, I know we love a good before and after, or B&A, depending on, what retailer you're talking to. So I wanted to start our conversation with a fun kind of B&A and talk about social media.
Yes.
So social media obviously is really booming now, and it wasn't 20 years ago. Instagram has only been around since like 2007 or something like that, I think.
Yeah.
And so I bring that up because there's a different way that consumers engage with brands now. Like when we think about how consumers engage with brands when there were print magazines, you were watching runway shows, there weren't shows on demand, like no Netflix. It was so different. And so I'd love for you to just share with your experience what some of the key differences that you've noticed across the time that you spent in beauty, and specifically related to marketing as things have shifted and changed.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. So you're absolutely right. I think I personally have witnessed that big transformation in the last 20 years. I would say, the big shift is really that sort of engagement with the consumers, right? And driven by the social media. So I would say early 2000, brands really kind of talk to customers more of a one-way street, right? So they really talk to them in a more of a traditional media, like you mentioned, traditional media, TV, radio, print, billboards, right? It's very much of like, I will tell you something and I hope you receive it. Now with the rise of social media, now all of a sudden consumers now have a platform, and they really are empowered by it to say, well, I'm going to say something. And now there's a platform where I can actually have a real-time one-on-one conversation for you to understand what I'm thinking about. So for better or for worse, now brands are really sort of forced to create that conversational space so that they can be interactive, so that they can actually be able to create that sort of personal conversation that has never been done before. So that to me, number one is like this big consumer centric conversation. And that really leads to the demand from the consumer to, having more authentic content, to have more transparency content. I would say like probably what I noticed, like maybe in 2016, 17, that transparency conversation, like brands start to really kind of use it as a special branding angle and say, we're different because we're transparent, or, you know, we're more authentic. But fast forward to nowadays and going forward, that's almost become the default. You have to be transparent. You have to be authentic. And I think that has like really shifted the way that the brand, you know, set up their branding, set up their sort of engagement with the consumers. The other thing that I really got to see sort of this sort of demand for that is a lot of the user-generated content started to really come in, influencer marketing. And everybody really kind of knows that. It's all sort of driven by the social media. And now, because there's that level of demand on consumer for brands to be engaging, they say, well, show me more than a print ad, like a very creative copy. Let me show real people using the content, using your product. Show the people opening the box. So, you know, it just really kind of, it's a healthy challenge, I think. And so brands are now kind of letting go that sort of the old traditional polished ads, right? Like it has to be the perfect model that's showing everything. Now they're showing diversity, they're showing behind the scene, they're showing a lot more real people stuff that people can like very, very much relate to. And so that's really more of like that sort of creative side. And I wanted to add, like, I also saw that something that the changes being really good for the brand side is now the accessibility of all of the metrics. So because of AI, because of the tools all the companies has, now you're able to dissect your audience a lot more in a very strategic way. So not just the sort of traditional demographic, right? So you can just, you know, you only have the data with age, gender, geography, right? But now you're able to segmentize them and you're able to say, look, this group of audience, they have this particular pain points. Let me talk to them this way. And then there's another group that has different ones. So I think the accessibility of that metrics and data is really allowing brands to be more effective in terms of targeting their customers. So I really, you know, saw these as kind of like the big change that's happening past and now and going forward.
Yeah, that's so good. It's like you don't have full control over what your brand is saying. And also you have more access to data so you can see who is actually buying your stuff and what's working and what's not. As you talked a little bit more about kind of that two-way street that now exists between brands and consumers, I actually thought about brand identity. And I wanted to ask you this question, especially because I think your company does such a great job at pulling together a brand identity for brands. I love the methodology that you've already shared with me in a previous conversation of how you guys do that. And I personally believe brand identity is extremely important. I'm like a old school, like do the work and have someone who knows what they're doing do it well.
Right.
But sometimes this work is overlooked. Sometimes folks will just Google it, you know, what is a brand identity, how to come up with a mission, and then they kind of pull it together. I'd love for you to share, do you think there's a difference with developing a brand ID on your own versus hiring someone to do this? Is it evident? And then I'd love for you to also talk a little bit about how you all approach, 8ru approaches brand identity and developing those strong, if it's visual or if it's also kind of the mission, that side of it, developing that for the brands that you work with. What elements are important? I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. That's such a good question. I love talking about it because branding is such an important aspect of your business. And especially in the very saturated market, you need to be able to stand out within the 5-second people look at you. It is often underestimated because when an untrained person looks at branding, what they see is simply a logo and a bunch of colors. So And that is true to a certain extent, but usually when a good branding is what we call, when we look at it, it has a soul. And someone can look at it and say, it says so much more than just a beautiful logo. So this is what I would tell a lot of times, like our customers. I said, you're able to do it, especially now with a lot of availability of data or, all the tools and resources that you have. You need to know that branding is more than a logo and more than trending colors. It needs to be a reflection of who you are. And this is what we call that soul searching brand strategy process. So why do you go to a trained professional or a professional agency? Because we're trained to look at brand in that way, and we're able to dissect it in so much different way, so that when we have that foundation set up for you, now your brand, all of a sudden, the logos, the colors, they mean something. There is ways that you are able to grow it with a lot of meanings behind it.
Yeah, and it ties into everything, right? The mission, the values, the colors, the choice of the logo. It's all I can see brands where I'm like, this story makes total sense. It wouldn't go together if you tried to put this logo with these colors.
Yes. So the difference is sometimes we do this exercise with our clients. We say, a lot of times when you're evaluating a brand, the conversation should be, I think I like this logo because I like the shape of the square and I love this coming in. It shouldn't be, well, I like these colors because they're trending colors. The question, right? The question should really be, is it right for my brand? So now it's not a objective evaluation. You have that sort of brand strategy to go back and say, does it make sense? Does it match my brand? Does it match my brand mission? Does it match my vision? Does it stand out from my competition? Does it actually say my value proposition? So I will go into a little bit more specific on how our agency does the process. So it's a sort of a three major elements and three major steps. Number one, I like to call it a soul searching process. It's really a brand strategy development. So in this process, what you do is you really would start with your audience. So I know brand owners, they hear this a lot. They're like, audience, I know my audience. My audience is women from 25 to 45. They use skincare. So it's very basic demographic question. So we sometimes would go in and say, that is really just the starting. You need to really go into understand your psychographic of your audience, right? So that goes into like, what do they do? What do they like? What's their inspiration? What's their aspiration? All of these are so important. And then it will go into your mission and it goes into your story. Your story needs to be, I say it needs to be like a 5-second movie. It needs to have its drama. It needs to have its climax. It needs to have all of that. Then people understand, like, that's how you make a very memorable story. So there's a lot of creativity, a lot of strategy that goes behind it. Then you move on to your competition. When we look at the competition, we don't just list them. We study them 360. We look at we have a comprehensive chart that we do where we actually go into what is the brand, this particular competition, their advocacy, what is their value proposition, what do they go into their products? We line them all up and then we say, where are you different? How can you say yourself differently? Then we have another aspect of it, which is the visual aspect of it. What colors are they using? Why do they use this color? And what is the tone and their personality? Then we also look at that. We say, this is where you're going to stand out. You're going to use this color because it's different from them and it reflects your story and it reflects your products. So this is all together as a brand strategy process. Then we take that into step number 2, which is then the visual identity. With all of that data, your visual identity now has so much more to say than I like the square and I like this logo and these trending colors. I have this example I always love to show. When people are coming up with their logo, sometimes they will say, I don't know, should it be all cap or should it be all lowercase? I don't know. And so usually would say, well, does usually all cap, what does it evoke when you look at it? It's usually credibility, presence, right? If your brand wants to say that, a lot of these sort of family business brands, because they've been around for years, that becomes a very important brand story narrative. You want to come off like you're established. You want to come off like you have been around. Or if you're a brand that's very, you want to be like very personable. I want to be your girlfriend that's like next to you, to be your skincare, friend that we talk about skincare. Then you want to be able to pick a more personable approach, which then lowercase becomes a potential option for you to pick. Or you can use a little both. The very first letter is capped, the rest is lowercase. So this is just a simple example to show why that brand strategy is so important that would translate into your visual identity. Then the third step is what we call the consistency so that you can amplify. So you touched upon that is, we create this sort of brand guideline. A good brand with a good solid brand guideline is scalable. So when you look at something, you don't just say, oh, today this Instagram post, I'm going to use this. Tomorrow website, I'm going to use this. It's a system. That's why we call it system, that it's able to allow you to use very similar elements but look different, but there still looks like they are coming from, the mothership. So consistency so that you're able to amplify all of your marketing, communication, and your collaterals. So I would say these are like the three very, very important process to develop a strong brand to then launch your brand.
That's so good, Kellie. And when you were even just talking about the caps, like the case styling that you use, I was like, wow. I mean, people don't even think about those things, but this is where when you are someone who has done this for a while and you are a true expert, you understand the importance of these small little details. And as someone who's worked also on the fashion side, if you will, product development, I know what it's like to go from, when you're working for, let's say, a designer like a Coach versus a mass brand, let's say Walmart private label, no shade, but there's a different level of the attention to detail. You're looking at, are we using contrast colors for the stitching? Versus that's not even a question that you might even consider. And so very similarly, you brought to us that, hey, there are details that you might not even consider that, a credible agency is going to look at and is going to bring to you. I love that.
I love it. Yeah, you said it. It's the attention to detail when it comes to good branding, is thinking and also putting it all together. That is a brand with a soul.
Yes. Well, look, talking about the agencies or talking about why using credible, services or agencies is helpful. The flip side of that is the reality, which is that money is tight for a lot of emerging brands.
Yeah.
And I bring this up almost every episode because that's the reality. The reality is that most founders are making choices between this or that. There's not oftentimes the money to spend on everything because it's not built into the budget like it is with your big CPGs who already have like an insights division and a branding division and all of these different budgets. So I'd love for you to just address, especially as I think about marketing costs being increasingly high and also digital marketing, I say, is consistently less effective. How do you work with brands, like thinking about the activation side of social media? How can brands craft social media strategies that are effective? Are there certain strategies that you find are more impactful that are going to give you a better bang for your buck? Would love to hear your thoughts on, making marketing super efficient for brands.
Yeah, I think to really create an effective social presence is really part strategy and part creative. So a lot of the times people think about social media, they're thinking creative, but that's really the execution side of it. So how we usually recommend our clients to come up with their social media content is to really kind of have a longer duration to plan out. So again, we kind of talked about the effectiveness of social media space. It's not just a particular campaign per se. It's almost like layers of cake. You want to be able to build your social media campaign layers with layers so that you are able to achieve different objectives. So you hear the crazy stats when we all experience it every day is, for our consumer to purchase one product, it takes about on average 7 to 9 times to interact with the brand, either see it or touch it or hearing other people talk about in order for them to pull that trigger. So that psychology is so important for brands to really take into consideration when you're looking at your social media presence as a whole. It needs to have a strong funnel in place. You need to be able to say, I'm going to start with this campaign and it's about really, introducing to customers about who we are from that sort of top line strategy level. What are we passionate for? All of that. There could be another one that just be about the products. There could be another one just about the fun things, like this is the emotional connections that we want to be able to build. So, we really want to advise our clients to like have that strategic mind in place when you start to develop your social media presence. Then the other side, this is where the fun side comes in. So it's the creative side. So I would say, be fun with it. Like social media needs to be super engaging, needs to be super quirky. Like have fun, get people together, look at trends, look at what's happening around you, and really build something unique around it. So I recently this is not a brand per se, but this is an influencer, and her name is Namefo. So she started this hashtag called Dumpling Dewy Glow. So it's really catchy. When I first came across her Instagram, I was like, what is this all about? She's like beautiful, glowy skin. She like puts on makeup. So she did a whole like brand story. She said, as a little girl, I love to eat. I love ice cream trucks. And as I grow up, like I'm exploring different kinds of food, and I love skincare. Like one day it just like kind of dawned on me, how do I combine the two things together? And she basically started this idea. It's like a guerrilla marketing style. She started this food truck with Asian food, so dumplings. So she would be selling food, but at the same time, pastel-free skincare products. And so this became a big business idea because, now she's able to solicit brands to come and say, hey, are you willing to give out free products? We're doing this fun food truck. She decorated into super cute things. Come and have some dumplings and, have, fun. And you also get products that you get to try on. So this became a really good, fun social media, guerrilla style campaign for customers. So, I say like the creative side is like, be fun, be different, like create that, conversation and let people, see why, we should choose you, stand out.
Right. Because it's like, who would think that dumplings and skincare go together? I mean, but clearly they do for her. Like, get it, girl. I love that. I absolutely love that. My gosh.
She's like combining this because she loves this kind of glowy look. So like the juiciness.
Yeah. So it fits too. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I love dumplings. I think
you have to check it out.
I'm like thinking about food now, but I'm going to stay focused on, beauty.
I know.
So look, as we talk about social media, I'd love to stay there. Do you think that the metrics that folks should be looking at to gauge effectiveness have changed? And if so, would love to just hear, if so or if not, what are the key metrics that you advise your clients to look at when they are reviewing those social media campaigns and asking, did this work? Was this effective?
Yeah. I think this is, sort of the unsexy side of branding and running the business, right? It's, at the end of the day is a business. So number is really the key thing to drive you long term. So I do think that I don't think the metrics has necessarily changed. It has become a lot more sophisticated with all of the tools. So my recommendation for founders is to get really, really good at understanding these metrics. Understand, what does it tell you? It should be telling you a holistic story. So these are sort of like the top ones I would say are, a good starting point to look at when you're running, any sort of campaign or marketing. Number one is your conversion rate. So it's important before you do any type of marketing, whether it's email marketing, all of that, you need to be very, very clear on your objectives. Are you looking for signups? Are you looking for customer engagement rate? Are you looking for number of purchases? All of those are going to be so important for you to figure out how effective you are. Then with this conversion rate, you need to understand where's your traffic coming from. So the traffic can sometimes be not very quality. It could just be, a lot of times these sort of social media campaigns can be very promotional driven. So sometimes it may not necessarily be driving the, quality potential long-term customer. So that's something that you wanted to look at. The other important one, you hear this a lot, is return on investment. So your ROI. So this really determines on the profitability of your campaigns. Now, in the beginning, when you're first running, you might not always have a positive ROI, and that's okay because you're testing things out. But you need to be very strategic about it because, the longer you grow, you need to be able to look at your campaigns and say, the future campaigns I'm going to run, it's going to be profitable. Then the third one I would say to look at into is your customer acquisition cost. So customer acquisition cost pretty much tells you how much money do I need to spend in order to get a customer. And you want to be able to keep that cost low. You need to track it over time. Then that also leads to customer retention rate, which is once I get a customer, how long do I get to keep them, right? So again, you drive a promotional campaign. It could a lot of times be very like a quick decision. Oh, I'm really getting the benefit of this discount. You need to be able to build your campaign so that you can keep your customer so that they can become a long-term customer. And then lastly is the customer lifetime value. So you want to be able to keep that high while you keep your customer acquisition low so that, they can spend more and more money with you. So I would say these are sort of like the 5 or 6 key ones that you need to be really good at so that you can constantly be, tracking them so that you see how effective your campaigns are.
That's really good. And as I think about tracking those metrics, I also think about you can manage marketing in-house. You can obviously hire an agency. Sometimes folks might hire someone just for a project. What are your thoughts on emerging brands' use of these various options available when it comes to marketing? I think there are benefits to, all of these things, each of these things, depending on what the goals are, but would love to just hear your thoughts, especially since you've been on the agency side. You've also worked in-house for brands. Would love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. So when it comes to in-house team, there are several really good benefits. Number one, you already have a team that understands the brand well. So the deep branding understanding, that's very important. Because with agencies, sometimes you have to train, it takes time. And that also leads to the brand having sort of direct control and also the agility. They're just in-house. It's great to, work with, we come up with a strategy and we have someone to implement it. That's another good benefit. The third one is cost. Now, the cost, it depends on, what you're looking for. Sometimes it could be costly just have a full-time employee. But let's say if your brand is somewhat, somewhere a little bit more established, you have constant marketing needs. If you're always looking for collaterals, then having an in-house team might actually be more beneficial because, it's the cost is built in throughout. And then lastly, and this is probably more applicable to like the bigger brands. Like usually bigger brands, you already have a lot of different departments that are, ready to go. And marketing is really just kind of a one component of it. You have sales team, your product development team, you have operational team. And so when you have it in-house, it's a more kind of easy, efficient process. Now let's go on to like what's great with going with an agency. With an agency, you actually get to have very targeted expertise. So when it comes to marketing, it's also so many different things, right? You have branding agency, you have growth agency, you have digital agency, you have social media agency, but they're all really good at what they do. So sometimes your marketing team, 1 or 2 person, they might just be specialized in one thing. And when you're ready to scale up, sometimes you need that very specialized expert. And number 2, is you get the fresh perspective. So even though they may not have the deep understanding, these agencies, they have been around. They have been, looking at different brands. They know what the best practices are. They are able to give you something that maybe you haven't even thought about. So that fresh perspective is so important to really kind of drive your brand to the next level. The third great thing about working with an agency is they have the resources and scalability. So usually agency, because they're in the industry, they have a lot of strategic partners. Again, their horizon is a lot more wider potentially than yours to bring in that sort of additional resources that you need to propel you forward.
That's so good, Kellie. And I didn't even think about just sometimes how the specialty is needed. I know when I was at Target, I was so surprised when I was working with some of my brand partners there to hear that they hired external agencies for their marketing. Mm-hmm. I was like, what? You guys have brand marketers? And I'm like, wait, as a brand marketer, or a brand manager, excuse me, as a brand manager, you are more so like a project manager. And I mean, it depended on the brand, right? But in many cases, it's like they were managing the ad campaign or the, new promoting of the new item campaign. They were managing that and saying, we're going to outsource this here, we're going to outsource this there. And sometimes they would have in-house marketing do things, but I was really surprised at how much of that work got outsourced. But to your point, like fresh perspective, a desire to have a specific type of specialty lens for it, that all makes sense as to why they might have chosen to do that for those specific brands. And even still, just to elaborate furthermore, you might have one brand at a big CPG, let's say, that like outsources everything, and another that like low budget, your brand managers coming up with things themselves. So
exactly. Well, sometimes
it really depends.
Do that. Right. It depends.
Right. So I say to the emerging brands listening, know that it's not always the big agencies that are used for the big brands too. Sometimes they have low budgets also.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. Well, look, I've like so enjoyed our conversation and just talking about branding and marketing and just how brands show up today and some of the things that they can consider as they're looking and evaluating their own metrics. As we come to a close, I'd love to just open this up to say, do you have anything else that you'd like to share or just any general advice that you can offer to emerging brands that are wanting to make their mark and breakthrough today?
Yeah, I would love that. It's so exciting when we first started with ARU because in 2018, you really start to see the merge of entrepreneurship. Like brands are coming in, founders are coming with great vision, and they're really, trying to stay away from that traditional corporate America way of branding. So I really applaud a lot of these new founders, emerging brands. Like, keep fighting. You're so brave, and it's so exciting, but it's not without hard work. Please reach out if anybody has any questions. I'm happy to, help in any way possible. I actually want to mention, we recently just put together a document called Are You Ready to Launch Your Brand? It's 10 simple questions. Like it's a great way to help, whether you're a brand new brand or you're emerging brands new brand. These are like the fundamental questions that we kind of talked about, like the soul searching process. And so in there, it's not just question. It actually has like a section. Every question has a section in the back with some expert sort of direction recommendation that we had recommended from years of experience to kind of help our founders to get to the next level that they want to get to. So I would definitely share the link with you. And, if anybody is interested to look into that, if anything, it's a great sort of tip-filled examples to use to help them evaluate their brand a little bit more.
Thank you, Kellie. I'll be sure that we include that in the show notes so that folks that are interested can check to say, are we ready? Because sometimes even if you think you're ready, it's like, oh, okay, there's a couple more things that we need to do still. So yeah. Thank you so much, Kellie. I can tell you've learned a lot. I've had a few marketing folks come on and talk and share on the podcast, but the perspective is so different based on your backgrounds and what you've done. And so I'm always just so appreciative of folks' ability to share new ideas, fresh perspectives. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful talking to you.
Thank you once again to Kellie for joining me on the show today. I continue to invite marketing professionals on the show because there's so much that you can learn from each individual's experience. And in some cases, the experiences that you have with working with prestige brands is a little bit different than the experiences that you have working with the mass brands. And as I always talk about here on the show, things change anyway because 2024 is not the same as how things were in 2000 or 2004 or any time before that. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, I encourage you to share this with a friend or a colleague. If you're on YouTube, give us a like or a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. And if you're on Apple or Spotify podcasts, please leave us a review. It helps to ensure that more folks hear about the Scaling Emerging Beauty podcast. I appreciate you listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.